Hey everyone, this week I'm blessed to have J.R. Debusk with me. J.R. Debusk has been an associational missionary down in Arkansas for about the past 8 years. He's served in various pastorates across his entire career. And so he's speaking from a wealth of experiences, bivocational pastor and longtime pastorates, and then seeing lots of other pastors in action through what he's done. And he's got we have a great conversation about things tied to our sense of calling in ministry and how that informs what we do as we do the things that God tells us to and lead our churches. So I'm excited for you to hear this week's episode. Welcome back to the Speak Life podcast. Hey, welcome back for another episode of the Speak Life podcast. This week I have J.R. Debusk with me. He is the Associational Missionary at Clear Creek Baptist Association and the Arkansas Baptist State Convention. J.R., how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Fantastic. And thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
So, J.R., why don't you just go ahead and jump in and talk a little bit about yourself, your family, your history and ministry, things like that.
Sure, I'd be glad to. My call to ministry was at age 15, but a 15-year-old doesn't always understand what that is. And so I rambled around for a couple of years, but as a senior in high school, I really firmed that call up and went to Washita Baptist University and then Southwestern Baptist Theological in Fort Worth, and did a MDiv there, and then later went back and did a DMin. So that call to ministry has been very important to me. Married to my wife. We've been married 52 years now. So
Congratulations.
That's been really, she's been a special part of my ministry all through the years. She's a real prayer warrior, and she's wise. I've had to depend on her wisdom sometimes when I get off track. And
I can identify with that.
Yeah. And we have three children, a daughter, oldest daughter and husband, and they have five children. Our son and daughter-in-law, they do not have children. And then our youngest daughter and her husband, of course, are at Bolivar First Baptist Church. He is pastor. And so they have four children, so we have 9 grandchildren. It's a lot of joy.
Yeah. And so you've been serving there at as Association Missionary, in Clear Creek for how long?
8 years.
8 years.
Yeah.
And then prior to that, you were you pastoring prior to that, or were you?
Yes, I was always a pastor. Even during my college years, I had a small weekend preaching point where I was a pastor, so to speak, and through seminary also. My last two pastorates, one was at Southside Baptist Church in Pine Bluff. I was there 13 years and 2 or 3 months, and then at First Baptist Church, Heber Springs, Arkansas, and that was 14 years to the day. First Sunday, the exact same date, 14 years later, when that ended for me to come here.
All right, so those are a couple of nice, longer than average pastorates too.
Yes.
So as you're speaking into challenges that pastors have faced, you've got a unique perspective then, because you've had a couple of long pastorates. You've pastored in bivocational and full-time capacities, if I'm hearing things right. You also have, so for everybody listening, the reason JR and I met in the first place is because both of those sons-in-laws I have served on church staff with. And now, of course, Adam and Holly are here. And so Adam's my pastor here at First Baptist Bolivar. And so you also have the experience of serving as an associational missionary and seeing all of those pastors in their church context. And
Yes.
so, as we get to the big question I typically ask on this podcast, you've got a wide, varied background. So I'm really excited to hear what you talk about. The questions we usually get to are, what are the top two or three greatest challenges that you've either seen or experienced in ministry? And then what are the suggestions you'd give for dealing with those challenges? So
Okay.
what would you want to dive into first?
Well, uh, it may seem odd, but the very first thing I would say is walking close to God.
Mm,
And I find it's easy. It was easy for me as a pastor to think, oh, I'm walking with God. I'm studying for sermons. When I would visit someone in the hospital or in their home, or they would come to the office, I would pray. But in evaluation, at some point, I would think, I haven't really spent time with God for me. I've done it in
yeah.
sermon prep, uh, Bible studies that I would prepare for to teach, that kind of thing. And it's easy to move ourselves over into really tricking ourselves into thinking we're walking close to God when
Yeah.
we haven't really spent personal time with God. And so I challenge pastors, I challenge staff members, people, make sure you're having that dedicated, committed time alone with God. And I found in my ministry it was good to take a week or so sabbatical a couple of times a year
Mm,
to just get alone, go to a cabin somewhere, something of that nature, and be alone with God. And a lot of praying, thinking, and uh, you know, I could do annual planning for sermons at times like that. So
yeah.
uh, that that really energized me and charged me up. So
Yeah. That, as you talk about that, there are a couple different things I think about. Probably the biggest one is I'm thinking about, and he wasn't making this comparison in the same way, but I think it fits. I'm thinking about a professor I had back at Southwestern, George Klein, who was my Hebrew professor back there for a few semesters. I also had him for another class on Isaiah. But I remember him talking through once the idea of thinking about the relationships we have kind of like a bank account, and that there are times in life that what we're going through, and he was comparing it to semester by semester and
mhm,
just the rigors of what goes along with being a
right,
student, that you're making a lot of withdrawals, and eventually you have to start making some deposits or you start bouncing checks,
yeah,
right?
right,
And so especially when you hit those times that you can, like in fall semester or Thanksgiving break, and then hitting into Christmas break during the spring semester during spring break, and then hitting summertime, being able to be intentional about making some deposits. Well, if I think that easily translates to talking about our relationship with the Lord for any of us who are in service in ministry, the idea of we make a lot of withdrawals on our own personal relationship with the Lord. We bank on that in terms of what we're doing as we're investing in others, including the time we spend in Scripture for sermon prep or lesson prep, the time we spend, hearing other people's burdens, things like that. That's a lot of withdrawals that we're making.
yes,
And if we aren't intentional about making deposits, spending intentional time with the Lord, whether it is the daily, or I love that you mentioned the taking a week here and there, a mini sabbatical, and just breaking away from the everyday just for that time of refreshment, making those deposits on purpose so that we continually are maintaining that account, so to speak. So we always have something to draw from, because eventually, if we run that out, we're just drawing on ourselves and we don't always have the best stuff to offer
right.
just for
That's
ourselves.
absolutely true, and I would find that I would do my worst preaching and would be lacking in wisdom of what to share with someone when they came to me with a need, or even feel like I was praying with any sense of spiritual power when I
Yeah.
was praying for someone.
Yeah.
So,
So what I'm thinking that through, I'm thinking about the two different components here, right? There's the everyday component, there's the week to week component that goes there. Like as we're living life day in and day out, as we're doing the ministry things that God's called us to do, how do we best go about protecting that time and being intentional about making those deposits? And then how do we plan? What are the things that we can do to plan for that time away? And I'm thinking about differences between, you've got, it's one thing to have a big multi-staff church and you can take a week away and there are other people on staff who can fill in the pulpit, versus that person who feels the pressure of, I'm at the smaller church that's got about 20 people, and I'm not sure that I don't feel like I can take that time away. What would
right.
you say?
Well, um, you can take a day. Uh, you can find a day somewhere. It may not be a week, but you can find a day somewhere along the way. But developing kind of a system of uh, daily, this is my time with God, uh, is really the key. And I know that when we were raising our children, that was kind
Mm-hmm.
of hard because when you get up in the morning, you hit it. You're throwing together breakfast, you're making sure everyone's getting
Yep.
dressed. Do you have your homework? Do you have your books? Let's get in the car, let's go. And by the time you make it to wherever, you're already exhausted. You've been running for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and so uh, I just came to the place that in the churches where I served, that I had to get away from the telephone.
Mm.
That's harder with a cell phone,
Yeah.
or but I had to get away from the traffic of the day, a secretary or a drop in, that needed to talk. So the last two churches that I served in, I found a room away from the office in the church that I could go to, and that's where I would go for an hour or two uh, most days. Some of it was for study, but uh, I needed that place where I could go and pray.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I found, you mentioned the phone there as part of that. So I'm guessing it's either putting a cell phone in airplane mode or just not taking it with you in there,
yeah,
to be able to have that distraction free environment. Because
right,
the interesting thing is, in this day and age, right, we are so trained that that phone lets us know anytime something's happened, that'll vibrate in your pocket even if you get it on silent. And I've just gotten to the place where I'm having to put it in airplane plane mode. I'm thinking about even when I go to church, just attending
sure,
church.
sure.
Uh, Another culprit is this bad boy right here. The
Oh,
Apple Watch
absolutely.
thing will go off. I stopped wearing my watch to church because
Yes,
we're all trained. As soon as it buzzes, oh, what's going on? And it just pulls you right out of worship. It
yes,
pulls you right out of focus on the Lord. And so finding that way and then being intentional about eliminating distractions to the best
right,
of your ability,
right,
um, it, which can be a little bit of a pride thing, I think, right? There's that sense of we have to recognize we're not so important that the world can't get by without us for 30
right,
minutes, 40 minutes, an hour.
right.
So getting rid of all that so we can do what we need to do.
Well, being intentional is the key, uh, and I have developed some things to keep me intentional, keep me on track.
Hmm.
Uh, One is, how am I reading the Bible? Sometimes it's reading the Bible all the way through. Sometimes it's read a passage here, read a passage here, and then go to the New Testament. But I have a reading plan, uh, that I try and stick to. But I also have developed uh, a prayer schedule,
Hmm.
and I will have I'll keep a daily prayer journal most days. Sometimes I don't write in that, but then I have a January, February, this is what I'm praying for. March and April, this is what I'm praying for. Now, I'll carry
Yeah.
some of those over, but as somebody's surgery is coming up, I'll put that in. And I may not pray through that every day, but 2 or 3 times a week, I'll go to that uh, and pray through that. Then I have a section of ongoing. I'm going to pray for this all the time. I've got one for my family. So that's just kind of a prayer notebook or a prayer book journaling that I have developed on my own, and it keeps me on track, and
Yeah.
it helps to have those things that uh, you need to go to uh, daily uh, to keep you on track. Uh, so that's how it works for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just being able to develop that routine on purpose.
Yes.
Uh, so the one thing that comes to mind for me, and this is, you know what, it's almost just personal confession time, is what it is. Um, there are things I really love about reading plans that I've done before and that I found to be very successful and beneficial for me. But I also, if you're listening to this and you're like me, sometimes I hit a place where life happens and I miss a day or two on a reading plan. I will get locked in on that and feel like I can never catch up, and it'll throw me all kinds of off.
Right.
I experienced that for the first time in a while earlier this year, and I had almost a month where I got way out of whack, and I
Yeah.
finally just had to toss a reading plan
Yeah.
and start over and transition into something different because I was just missing time with the Lord because I felt it started to feel like an obligation, which is never
Yeah.
what it's supposed to feel like.
Yeah. Well, and that's when you set up a plan, it can become drudgery, can become legalistic, it can create guilt. But I heard a pastor during the last year say, "Hey, life happens, and if you miss a day, don't beat yourself up. God knows what your schedule is. He
Yeah.
knows what happened, and uh, get back on track as you can." So you
Yeah.
know,
The stuff that I know that I would say to, if I had a, in a counseling context, if I had a client who was struggling with something like that, I would be all kinds of willing to extend them grace and help them come up with a plan to ease back into it.
yeah,
It's like, look, if
yeah,
you haven't been reading for a couple of weeks, if you read 1 or 2 days in the coming week, that's more than what you were doing. And if you continue to increase that to the place back where you're reading every day, that's the kind of overall long-term transformation we're looking for.
right,
And it's easy for me, and I think I'm probably not the only one who's ever been in ministry, to extend that kind of grace to other people and not be real good at extending it to myself.
yeah. That's true. We beat ourselves up too often.
Yeah. Yeah. Easy, too easy to do.
Yeah.
Uh, so with that being said, then that, I think that's a good word on being intentional about walking with the Lord. I think you had some other topics that you were thinking about.
Yes. Yes. This may seem an odd thing, but uh, you need to work out of your calling, work and serve out of your calling. And I will, I want to share, what was happening with me at one point in my life that helped me discover that I always have to work out of my calling. I was in a church. It was troubled. It was fractured fellowship.
Hmm.
It was that way when I came, and I was there 5 years. During that period of time, something happened where I was under oppression. Uh,
Mm.
and I was thinking, uh, I'm going to be fired. There were threats toward my family.
Oh man,
it was
that was bad.
pretty. It was rough. And I would go to the sanctuary and spend sometimes a couple of hours just knelt in the altar praying. I tried to bargain with God. I'll let me resign, give me direction on another job. I'll do something else. This isn't working. And there was never a time that I went and did that I didn't seem to hear by the Spirit's talk into my heart. Did I not call you to ministry? Did I not call you here?
Yeah.
And that sense of call gave me peace, and I would get back at it. And so I began to learn that it didn't matter who was angry with me or what difficulty might arise within uh, the congregation or my family or whatever else was going on, that if I kept my finger on the pulse of my call to ministry, things, I had more peace and I had more sense of direction. And that can be you've got a brilliant idea and you share it with the deacons, or you share it, with a planning committee or something, and it's shot down.
Yeah.
And you can be devastated if you're not working out of your calling.
Yeah.
you know, uh, I, you can beat yourself up or be angry. And I just learned to work out of my calling and always back into that calling and work my way out. Uh, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that 100% makes sense. So the idea of uh, yeah, the idea of resting in, taking reassurance from that sense of call, knowing that God didn't call you into ministry and realize afterward, oh, I made a huge mistake.
Yeah,
That's not how
that's
God
right. No,
operates.
no.
And God, perfectly knowing you and perfectly knowing your church, made that pairing,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Well, and you look at scripture and Elijah
Mm-hmm.
got panicky, even into discouragement and depression. Has all the symptoms of a deep depression,
Yeah,
and runs, and God gets him to the place where listen to the still small voice.
yeah,
Did I not call you? And you're not the only one. I've called others. And it was at that point he had spiritual power again.
yeah,
Peter denying the Lord, and Jesus on the shore of the lake
yeah.
calling him back. Did I not call you? You feed my sheep. You feed my sheep. You feed my sheep.
Yeah, you brought up Peter, and I was actually thinking of a different story about Peter. I was thinking about when he stepped out of the boat, he was willing to step out and walk on the water, but the moment he took his eyes off Jesus, and that
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
just started to sink. And I think some of what Elijah experienced was the people wave equivalent, if I could put it like that. Just the challenges he was facing as he was dealing with
yeah.
uh, everything with Ahab and Jezebel. So
Right. There's another aspect of this in the church growth pressure that we have if we're not baptizing a lot of people, if we're not getting, we
yeah,
can begin to work out of a corporate model or out of and we'll find ourselves off in left field very quickly, or we can hear the pressure of people putting pressure on us to be a certain way or to preach a certain way or
Yeah.
uh, do certain things that may not be in our comfort zone. Sometimes we need to be challenged to step out,
Yeah.
but certainly we do not need to be led out of what God called us to do and be.
Yeah. I think it's, for some of that, it comes back to placing things where they belong according to priority. And I don't know that's even the best way to word it, but like I'm thinking, you mentioned the corporate model thing. I'm thinking there are things that are of value out there in some of those books in thinking
Oh,
through, like
absolutely.
personally, like I love Pat Lencioni stuff. Uh, and I think there are things of value to gain from that, but only in the right perspective,
Yes.
right? It's not scripture. It's not it's not going to last a lifetime and beyond. It's got its place in helping us maybe understand some things about how to work in a larger organization, how to think about meetings, but none of it takes the place of following the Spirit's leading and relying on our call and what we're
That's
doing.
right. So
Yeah.
I, I've just seen people struggling, and as an associational missionary, I've been able to come along. Let's think about your call. Share your call. Talk to me about your call, and and I've been able to use that experience that I had, go into a little more detail sometimes, and uh, but
Yeah.
they have said, oh, I get it. Yes, that's where I need to be. So
Yeah. And there are times when you walk through some of those heaviest times in ministry, yeah, leaning into that call is what keeps you going.
oh yeah, yeah,
I know I've had this conversation with multiple people, and I don't think on the podcast, but people that are peers that have gone through doctoral studies, like you went through your DMin, and same thing with going through a PhD. There are times that's hard.
yes it
You
is.
have life happening. You're busy. I remember the one of the last real. It's not wasn't so much a semester. It was when I transferred from to New Orleans. I had to do a reading seminar, and so I had was married with some kids that were in elementary school and middle school. Uh, it was summertime, so that was our peak time for the resort ministry stuff that we were doing. We had two summer missionaries living with us that summer. I was running my counseling practice, and I was having to do a 4 credit doctoral level readings seminar to catch up on some credits just in things that were different between Southwestern and New Orleans. So I ended up that summer, I would go counsel all day, go home, basically get dinner, and then sit with a cup of coffee out on my porch, basically with journals and notepad, writing down notes out of journal articles till about 10 o'clock at night. I read 10,000 pages in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
I was just swamped with stuff. And there are times during that I was like, is this worth it? But when there's the sense of, I know this is what God's called me to,
Right.
that's what gets you through.
Sure. Sure. And that sense that God called me to this, God's with me, he's not surprised by what's happening, I can do this in Christ. uh, that's the peace
Yeah.
that gets us through.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, with that being said, I'm looking at the time, and I know you had another topic you wanted to bring up, and I think we have a couple minutes to be able to talk that
Yeah,
through. So, uh, you wanted to talk a little bit about weaving discipleship into everything that we do.
that's right. I look back at ministry, and some of the most fulfilling things that I've done in my life is in the discipling of others. I I learned, discovered that if you wanted strong deacons, you needed to disciple them and what it is to be a deacon.
Yeah.
Uh, if I had a young person that had a sense of call to ministry, uh, I spent time with them, just we'd take a book like the book of James, and let's just read a passage, talk through it, pray.
Yep.
Then I would, the young men, I would help them. You know, do you think being a pastor is in your calling? If you think it's a staff position, you're still. So let's work through what it's like to do a sermon. Uh, so that's where I became acquainted with my son-in-law, who is your pastor. Is
Yeah.
he had a sense of call, and we just spent time together working through the book of James and uh, spending time together in prayer, and that's been very special. But he was not the only one. There were
Right.
many others, and sometimes they realized in doing that with me, that was an emotional response at a camp or revival or it was an
Yeah.
emotional response, and maybe ministry isn't where God's leading me. Maybe God's just leading me to be a strong Christian businessman or teacher,
Yep.
So, but I feel more fulfilled when I'm discipling someone in some way, and
Well, and
that's important.
it draws me back to when you do that and you're discipling others, being intentionally about discipling those others, that that goes back to the last thing we're talking about. That's constantly reinforcing the call.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything we've talked about is kind of in that call. If we don't walk
Yeah.
close to God, we'll lose that sense of call, and we reinforce it and help others in their call when we disciple.
Yeah. Absolutely. Uh, so if I'm thinking through, if there's a pastor out there who's recognizing this is an area where I struggle, or how do I become more intentional about this? What are the things you would say to a pastor who's like, I want to do this more, I don't know how?
Okay, as a pastor, you're going to make hospital visits. Get someone to go with you, and use that as a time in the car to talk about something. Just share something and let them share. Uh, Model for them then. How do you make a visit in the hospital?
Mm.
Uh, Talk about, you notice I didn't sit on the bed. You notice I asked permission to pray. Notice I knocked on the door before. I didn't just barge in.
Yeah.
Uh, I was sensitive when the nurse came in. Do we need to step out? Just model the kinds of things that
Yeah.
you go through, and talk it through people. And you may not be able to spend hours and hours with someone, but you can spend 30 minutes occasionally. Uh, and I know that's hard as a bivocational pastor, a pastor of a small church where you're doing everything. But if you're a single staff pastor, you better be discipling people in how to do youth ministry, how to teach Sunday school, how to
Yeah.
work with children, or directing them to where they can be discipled, or you're going to have a load that you can't carry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every single one of us is blessed with 168 hours in a week. And if we sleep
Yes.
like we're kind of normal people,
Yeah.
that means we're awake for about 110 to 115 hours a week. And unless you want to use all of them doing all the ministry things, you better get some
Yes.
people to help.
Yes. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not going to have time left over for
Right.
family and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The other thing that occurs to me that, even if it is the one individual, if it is the bivocational, you still can build it into the things you're already doing, is what you
Yes.
described.
Yes.
Like, you're going to be doing hospital visits anyway.
Yeah.
You're going to be doing some sermon prep anyway. Every once in a while, bringing somebody alongside, say, "Hey, let me show you how I do this."
Yes.
Not that that's your every week, but that you're intentional about some of
Yes.
those times.
Yes. That you pour yourself into someone else's life at different points
Yeah.
is the key.
Yeah, which is exactly the model we see throughout the New Testament.
Yes. Yeah.
So, JR, thank you so much for joining me today. For all of you who are listening, thank you for joining and listening today, and we will have a new episode for you next week. God bless.